The history of Britain has often been shaped by war. Oh,
Again, that crunching noise is where you hit the bone.
that's bone. Our ancestors fought to defend their land, their cultures and their beliefs, constantly getting driven
Pushed
back
back.
here. Sometimes against invaders like the Normans and the Romans, and other times against their fellow countrymen. I want to put myself in their shoes, to find out what they ate, which weapons they used, and how they lived.
Forget your chivalry. This is life or death.
And I'm curious to learn more about the key battles in British history to discover how they've influenced our past and our present. So I'll be meeting historians, archaeologists, and weapons experts to find out how 6 critical battles changed the path of this country. I'm on my way to the site of one of the most important battles in Scottish history, a battle still celebrated to this day. In 1314, just south of Stirling here, an estimated 8,000 Scots squared up against the mighty English army of at least 12,000 men. It was a conflict of David and Goliath proportions that became known as the Battle of Bannockburn. When England's King Edward I died, his son Edward II inherited the crown. Whereas Edward I had been called the Hammer of the Scots, records show that the new king was viewed as weak-willed and frivolous, with little interest in politics or war. The English had been the aggressive rulers of Scotland since at least 1296, and the Scots had been fighting to regain control of their lands for more than 20 years by the time of Bannockburn. The Scots, led by King Robert the Bruce, were gradually forcing the English army out, and by 1314 there was just one English stronghold left in Scotland, Stirling Castle. The English may have had possession of the castle, but they were surrounded by Robert the Bruce's army. Stirling Castle is positioned on the main crossing point of the River Forth, which divides the north and south of Scotland, giving it great strategic importance. If Scotland was to achieve independence, Bruce and his men had to succeed in repossessing Stirling Castle. Historian Fiona Watson has been studying the Battle of Bannockburn for over 30 years. What were the events then that led to I guess almost the inevitability that there was going to be a battle between the Scots and the English?
Well, about Easter, Robert Bruce begins a siege of the castle. So there's lots of Scots sitting outside. And he then hands over control of the siege to his brother, his youngest brother, Edward Bruce. And it's Edward that seems to have made the agreement, presumably with his brother's say-so, with the garrison commander here, the English commander, Sir Philip Mowbray, who's actually a Scot, that if an English army does not come within about 3 miles of the castle, then it will be handed over to the Scots at midsummer.
Why make such an agreement? Why not just attack, ransack the castle, take over control immediately?
This is all a stratagem. By making the agreement with Philip Mowbray, he's basically saying to Edward, you're going to have to bring an army or you can forget it. This castle is mine.
And do you think that in itself was strategic by Robert the Bruce to draw Edward II specifically here to Stirling because the Scots had a better understanding of the layout of the land and how a battle might go down?
That is exactly what Robert Bruce was doing, drawing Edward II here to this place because Robert Bruce has decided that if we're going to fight a battle, it should be here because this is ideal terrain for an infantry army, an army of foot soldiers, of spearmen, to take on a cavalry army because this is not good ground for horses. So having made the agreement, this gives Robert Bruce the time to take his men, and he heads southeast to the Torwood near Falkirk and begin training his spearmen.
All the pieces are in place for the ultimate showdown.
Really, this is the last ditch for Edward II. This is Edward II must make an effort to rejuvenate the Scottish War on his behalf, or pretty much lose all of Scotland.
8 years before Bannockburn, Robert the Bruce's reign as king got off to a disastrous start. The English defeated him at the Battle of Methven, then captured and killed 3 of his brothers. But who was the man wearing the crown? Well, here's the statue of Robert the Bruce here. I mean, depicted very much in a warrior pose. Was that the man?
Well, it became the man, but to begin with, when he seized the throne, he was absolutely rubbish as a military leader. He made every mistake in the book in his first year. He was totally naive and totally inept, and he ends up in exile, possibly in the Hebrides, and undergoes this incredible transformation and comes back a very, very different military leader. I mean, what he was doing, what he was reading, and who he was talking to, we will never know. But he clearly had studied how to win.
And how strong was his motivation then to drive out the English? His
motivation was to be king. He would do anything to achieve that, including murdering a man. So he is, in some ways, he's a quite ambivalent character, but from Scotland's point of view, he was exactly what the nation needed to get rid of the English, as he became when he came back from his exile.
That's a sign of the times, isn't it? If you were going to maintain your power and have any kind of stronghold, you needed to be brutal along with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should underestimate how horrible life would have been in these times, and Robert Bruce was the man for the hour, you know. But as the mark of a great leader, I think, is knowing when to use the sword and when to be lenient and magnanimous.
It seems to me as though Robert the Bruce is a bit of a shrewd operator. He knows that if he's going to successfully drive the English from Scotland once and for all, he's going to need to defeat Edward II himself. And he also knows that if Edward II comes, he'll arrive with huge numbers of professional soldiers. So Robert the Bruce sets the scene here in Stirling, strategically to play to his advantage in what will become one of the most significant battles in British history. On the 17th of June, King Edward II gathered his troops on the banks of the River Tweed, on the border of Scotland and England, to begin the long march north to Stirling. After 4 days of travelling between 15 to 20 miles a day, they arrived just 10 miles south of Stirling Castle.
They just expected to come up to Stirling and beat the Scots. They just thought, well, of course we're going to win.
Meanwhile, Robert the Bruce was preparing his men for battle. Archaeologist Derek Alexander is showing me their hiding place.
One of the things he was very keen to do was to train them, to get them together so that they could drill properly, so they could defend off against the heavy cavalry that's coming.
A period of training would probably have been quite crucial.
There'd be a certain amount of using the veterans, the guys who'd done it before, to stiffen the ranks with maybe, you know, what you do is maybe make them the front ranks, the guys who know what they're about, and then you make it up and start, so you build up your units. So he's maybe got, I don't know, 5,000 to 6,000 spearmen, something like that, broken into 3 individual units. Torwood would have been a good place to be because it's got, you know, resources here, so there's plenty of wood for fires. There's water, and of course you're on the main road in and out of Stirling, so you can get resources and supplies coming down to feed your troops.
Torwood would also have been a good place because they would have been concealed, but concealed from who?
Well, one of the things obviously is that the garrison at Stirling Castle are still under English control, so Philip de Mowbray is there. So he would have spies out, no doubt about it. They would be looking in to see what sort of numbers are gathering. Maybe being in a wood area like this is actually quite a useful place. So you'll see people coming and going, but will you ever get a full picture of the Scots Army?
As word spread that the English army were nearby, Robert the Bruce made a strategic decision to relocate his troops. A decent view up here.
Yeah, it's quite a nice spot, isn't it? It's the sort of highest bit of ground in the vicinity. Gives a good view to the south.
Where are we here then?
So we're right on, basically the Bannockburn runs in the middle ground here, and we're in the new park. So this was where Robert the Bruce probably had his camp on the first day of the battle.
So in a sense, he's retreated to come here, has he?
He's pulled back And I think he's probably pulled back to this position on purpose. He knows that that's the way Edward II is coming. He can't fight in Torwood either. He pulls here for a number of reasons. He's got a great defensive line on the Bannockburn.
This is right on the way towards Stirling Castle.
The Roman road going directly towards the castle, basically up from the south to the north. And what Robert the Bruce does is he plants his troops directly across. He sits astride the Roman road, and what he's saying is, stop, you're not coming any further. He's trying to prevent them from getting to their prize, which is Stirling Castle. His right flank is protected here by Halbert's Bog and by Milton Bog, so he can't be outflanked. And the further west you go, it gets a lot more rough ground. You get a lot more woodland and more bogs. So if Edward tries to get around that way, he's going to be stuck.
And what's preventing him going further east?
The further east you go, there's quite a steep gully that the Bannockburn falls into. That would be quite a difficult thing to cross. If he's going to get attacked, he wants to be attacked from the front. He doesn't want to be surrounded.
Just in case the English did reach the high ground, the Scots planned an ingenious and deadly defensive weapon to stop them in their tracks.
Oh, you're an archaeologist. Look at that.
Yeah.
So how deep are we looking to dig this pit here?
The pits are mentioned by Barber in Barber's Bruce, the big long poem about Bannockburn. And it says that they're about a foot in diameter.
Yeah.
And they're dug to the depth of a man's knee.
Do you want me to have a go?
Yeah, go for it.
This is to try and show a little bit about some of Bruce's tactics, was it?
Robert Bruce excavated, had his men dig a whole series of pits on either side of the line of the Roman road. I mean, we're probably talking hundreds, if not thousands of these things. And they're laid out in a pattern, a bit like a honeycomb. And what it's doing is it's stopping cavalry charging. Even if one horse goes down and puts one hoof into it, it'll take down the guy on your right, maybe take down the guy on the left. And all the guys in the back are going to pile in. And once that happens, you get disorder and commotion. So this is literally a minefield for heavy cavalry.
Digging these pits then,
Yeah.
Bruce was almost dictating the direction and the width of any cavalry charge or any cavalry approach.
It's a tactic he's used before to funnel cavalry.
As the sun starts to set, I'm still digging.
Yeah, you're nearly there.
I needed that encouragement.
This is one battle the Scots are definitely winning.
So it's a man's knee. That's the definition we have of how deep it is.
This will tell us how deep we are.
All right, yeah, okay, we've got a gauge here.
In relation to my knee.
Go on.
So, my knee's still, that's the bottom of my knee is there. It's still going to break my leg if I fall into its speed, isn't it?
True, which is the point.
The next step is to load the hole with a sharpened stick.
Let's give that a bash.
So, driven it in, see if we can get it out. See if we can. Oh, no problem.
There we go.
Pointy end up.
Pointy end up, yeah. Look at that. Not bad.
So it's a very cheap and effective form of defence. I mean, if you've got enough manpower to dig holes, everybody can dig holes and pile the soil up. And probably everybody in the medieval period had a sharp knife, and all you need to do is cut a couple of branches off one of the trees nearby, whittle it down quickly. I mean, just a couple of swipes to give it a point, stick it in there.
Just a few more then needs digging to make this an effective line of defence.
Yeah, another 1,000 or so.
1,000 more?
Maybe.
All right, well.
Let's go.
On we go.
The next day, Derek and I are following the old Roman road that the English would have used as they marched north to Stirling Castle.
Edward thought he was up for a long time, so he brought an awful lot of stuff with him. He thought he was here to occupy Scotland as much as anything. So seemingly the baggage train had lots of stuff in it that they were going to use when they were here. The baggage train was something like 20 miles long, according to some of the sources. So, it would have been stretched out because you can only get one of these things on a Roman road at a time.
The Scottish army lay in wait for the English to advance. And here is the site where it all kicked off.
This is the Bannockburn.
This is Bannockburn, This is the Bannockburn itself. Coming through.
Coming through. This is the Bannockburn itself. This is the Bannockburn. This is the Bannockburn. This is the Bannockburn. This is the Bannockburn. gully. So it's from here upstream, banks are relatively low and sort of crossable. But as soon as you get maybe 50 metres this side,
Yeah.
it gets into quite a steep ravine and gets, would be very difficult to cross. So we have the hollow way here, which comes down to the line of the old Roman road.
Riding ahead of the main English army, an advance party of cavalry was known as the vanguard.
And you can imagine the English vanguard of heavy cavalry trotting down here, splashing across the ford and trying to gather here in some way, because on the horizon behind them, they can see the spears and banners and things of Robert the Bruce's army. Splashing through the ford at the front of the vanguard is Henry de Bohun. The knight, fully armoured, big war horse, lance, and he comes splashing through here and comes up probably maybe 100 metres or so beyond the ford here, we think. He spots out in front of the Scottish spearmen a man with a circlet crown round his head and riding a small horse, and he thinks that's Robert the Bruce. Now, I can go all out for death and glory here. If I can take out Bruce at the start of this battle, it's all going to be over pretty much.
And what a hero he would have been, de Bohun would have been.
Absolutely. So he's probably a pretty young guy, hot-headed. So he goes for it. He lowers his lance and rides full tilt at Robert the Bruce. Now, Robert the Bruce, basically what he should have done was probably hidden behind his spearmen and it would have been okay. But he sees that this guy's charging towards him and he accepts the challenge. He turns his small horse towards him. He doesn't ride at him full pelt, waits till the guy comes on, the guy's lowering his lance, he pulls his horse to one side, rises up in his stirrups and smacks down his axe right into the helmet of de Bohun. It falls off his horse, dead, and in front of all the Scottish spearmen, who obviously cheer, and what a boost for morale that would be for the Scottish troops. And obviously the exact opposite for the English vanguard when they see that happening. First confrontation, first blood to the Scots.
It was a terrifying moment, but one in which Bruce does show his skill and his mettle. De Bohun this was all or nothing. I mean, he clearly wasn't expecting to come off worst in this encounter with the Scottish king. But that's a fight to the death. I mean, Robert Bruce didn't have much choice in that. It was kill or be killed.
With that simple axe, the Scots had the upper hand after day one of the battle. I'm on my way to meet blacksmith Magnus Sigurdsson Hardradi to learn how weapons like this were made.
Magnus, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Do we think they'd have been produced in a similar fashion to how you're producing this axe head here?
Yes, I mean, basically what you've got in this forge is something that hasn't really changed since the medieval times.
Yeah. What were the reasons, do we think, that the Scots liked the battle axe?
Scottish warfare is different to English warfare. Whereas the mounted knight is becoming really sort of dominant on the battlefield of England, there's not many places in Scotland you can actually use mass cavalry charges. So what you're mainly fighting is infantry battles. So that tends to be spear, shield, and then when you get into close combat, an axe is really efficient. Why use an axe over a sword? Swords are really expensive. See, a lot of the poorer people, which were most of the Scots, would have relied on semi-agricultural things. Spears are dirt cheap. If a sword costs as much as a small house, a spear costs 4 chickens. A lot of axes just weren't war axes, they were multi-purpose. Chop the wood, bash your neighbour's brains in. If it's going to be used for cutting wood, it needs to be thicker so that it wedges and splits. If it's going to be used for cutting flesh, I make the edge thinner, because it then needs to be a meat cleaver on a stick.
Robert the Bruce took down de Bohun with an axe. Why would he have had an axe as his weapon of choice?
He would have had a sword, and swords are highly efficient. But when you're actually dealing with another armoured opponent, a sword isn't going to actually go through all of that. The thing about the axe is, even though it won't go through it, it will deliver a crushing blow. So if it won't defeat the armour, it will smash you to pieces inside the armour. I'll get this up to temperature and I'm going to quench it in there.
What does that do?
It will actually harden the edge. Now, I've hardened that. I can now watch as the heat line goes back down.
That's gonna draw back down into the edge.
And that's done. Put that to one side.
So that now, once that cools, that's ready, is it?
Yep, you put it on a shaft and it can go.
It's not bad, is it? Through hammering, that's not bad at all as an edge.
I've done this before.
With one of their top knights killed, the first day of the battle had been disastrous for the English. Historian Callum Watson is showing me where they would have bedded down for the night.
There we go, Callum, a nice roaring fire.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that makes a massive difference,
It does indeed.
Wow. Finding somewhere to make a good camp so they could have a good rest, a good feed that night would have been absolutely critical. Were they able to find and make such a camp?
The English have to go quite a long way before they can find an area that's flat enough that they can get things like their horses and possibly any carts that they're using to bring supplies across the Bannockburn. And they find themselves in a wide, flat area, an area known as the Carse, between the Bannockburn and the Pell stream, two streams that flow together down there.
What was that area of ground like then, the Carse?
There are areas that are not very solid under normal circumstances anyway, but B, when they've had 20,000 Englishmen and the hooves of their horses and the wheels of their carts and so forth going across them, they get very muddy, very churned up, they become very soft and very...
like almost bog-like?
Yes.
Almost?
Yeah.
But for the men and for the English army, how would it have been?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were a common soldier in the English army on that night of the 23rd, I would feel, fundamentally, I would feel frustrated that so little had gone the way of the English. I would feel very frustrated with the leadership of the English army, that they seemed so disunited. There may also have been a general feeling in the English army that Bruce had that best of the first day, but that if he was daft enough to stay on that battlefield when the sun came up, that things would go very differently.
But the Scottish didn't wait for the sun to rise. They were getting ready for battle at around 3:15 a.m. But what would they have had in their bellies? I'm meeting food historian Emma Kay to find out what they ate to give themselves the energy for the fight.
The Scottish army, they'd been travelling around a lot and fighting a few battles before they got to Bannockburn. So how would they have been keeping themselves fed?
Well, there would have been a degree of foraging, and they would have eaten some meat but cooked it inside the hide itself, so it would have been quite indigestible. But they would also have had a lot of portable foods as well. They would have tied up like loaves of bread underneath the saddles, but the bread itself would have become sort of full of all the sweat from the horses. It would have been very wet and very unpleasant. Oh. And you're talking about hard rye bread, like...
Oh, here we go, yeah,
like
okay.
this. This is a very sort of traditional sourdough rye bread, the type that they probably would have been eating. As you can see, it's very solid. It's very hard.
Yeah. That's heavier than I thought, because that's a small loaf there, but it's got some weight to it, hasn't it?
That would have been quite something in your belly.
Oh, that's proper stodge.
They would also have carried sort of small sacks of oatmeal as well, because oats obviously were very important to the Scottish. They weren't able to grow wheat in the same way that the English were. They couldn't cultivate it in that kind of climate. So oats and barley was sort of like the main grains. And what they would have done with the oats is made sort of very basic oat cakes that they would have then mixed with water from the stream and kind of mixed them together and then cooked them on a stone on the fire.
Go on then, so let's do some Scottish oat cakes.
Okay.
Less washing up like this, isn't it?
There we go.
So what am I doing with that?
Right, squeeze it together.
So I'm making
a little round shape, and then just sort of flatten it like a bit of a pancake.
That quickly goes very stodgy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so it's that starch that's coming out here.
That's what's going to make it kind of a hard sort of biscuit.
So then that just gets cooked, does it?
Yep,
that just gets heated up.
Put it onto a hot stone.
All right. So fire, hot stone.
It's that simple.
The diet for those Scottish soldiers then was quite stodgy then.
quite a bit of carbs, but also a good mix of protein as well from the meat, but less meat. And at that time, Britain as a whole would have been eating a very popular dish called pottage.
Okay.
Which we got from the French. It basically just means in a pot. And they would put everything into the pot, basically vegetables. You wouldn't have had much meat in there at all, maybe a little bit.
This is pottage here, is it then?
This is pottage.
You can see all the barley there as well. Is it leek and cabbage?
Leeks, cabbage, onions. Those were the main vegetables there.
That's good. That smells good to me. It's a good kind of vegetable stew.
Yeah, they were many people that lived in medieval Britain were vegetarian, largely. Only the wealthy really ate meat. The English would have had more food. We know that the English took cattle and they took sheep, and they would have had a great deal more meat.
Well, let's check on the oatcakes.
Yep.
Because they've been on there for a little while now. Let's have a look, see how they're doing.
Oh, they've firmed up a bit.
That's basically just about drying it out, isn't it?
Mmm. Yummy.
There's just no flavour in it. There's no taste, is there?
No. You feel for the men, really, that they were having to eat this and sweat-covered bread and, very little else, really.
Oh, it's tough, isn't it?
Very tough. And then fighting on that.
Yeah.
All day.
Fighting, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised the English didn't dine on the Scottish oatcakes. Let's try the pottage.
So in there's everything I need, isn't there?
You've got,
carbohydrates, got a bit of protein, a few vitamins.
It's all fresh, all good.
Cheers. That's all right.
Is it? Is it really?
That adds a lot of flavour. That adds at least flavour.
To the biscuit?
To the oat biscuit.
Well, there you go. So you've probably done exactly what they would have done.
I think what this is really kind of hammers home for me is that this is very basic food because on the move the whole time, it's all about practicality, convenience, but trying to give you energy to go and be able to fight. And to fight well. I mean, we might dismiss it as being insignificant because the battle was the main thing, but without food, without the fuel, they wouldn't have been able to fight at all. So, arguably, it's a huge part of what happened over the day of the battle.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there were lots of contributory factors, but I believe that food was integral to who won and who lost at the end of the day.
Nobody likes a Monday morning, but the morning of Monday the 24th of June 1314 would have been particularly bleak for the English army of King Edward II. That was the day they had to beat Robert the Bruce and his army once and for all. The Scottish king decided on a dawn attack. He ordered his infantry to line up in full view of the English. Joining me down at the Carse is historian Callum Watson.
There's this story of the Scots getting into formation and then kneeling in prayer, and King Edward seeing this and assuming that they have come to surrender or that they've come to sort of beg him for mercy, but they're not begging for mercy from the English king. They're begging for mercy from God for all the blood they're expecting to spill on such a holy day as St. John the Baptist's Day.
It must have been an incredibly confusing sight for the English, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, something I suppose that the English haven't seen before. The Scots in full battle array, as it were, the sort of Scottish royal host ready for a pitched battle. It is a sight that is deliberately designed to intimidate. And it's almost certainly not something that the English are expecting to see in this form, coming at them and bringing the battle to them. There's no doubt in my mind that that front line of the English army are expecting to win this.
Yes.
And the people there on the battlefield, sitting on their horses, well-armed and well-trained in that front line of the English army, must be expecting that what amounts to a long line of tenant farmers are not going to be able to withstand the full force of this heavy cavalry charge that they're about to unleash on them.
But the Scots had a tactic to counter King Edward's cavalry charge.
So the Scottish army is predominantly foot soldiers, there's a small amount of cavalry. So what each foot soldier has is a spear. And each foot soldier is arranged within a much larger body of men, maybe about 1,000 strong, into what's called a schiltron. It's meant to repel cavalry.
the Scottish army formed themselves into 3 large schiltrons. I've come to meet historian Lars Cook to find out more about this defensive tactic.
Good morning.
Flippin' heck. I assume it's Lars, is it?
It is.
Lars, how you going?
Nice
This
to
is
meet you.
awesome. Rob,
Right.
what a get-up.
Yes.
And quite an aggressive weapon you've brought with you.
Oh yeah,
Lars.
simple but very, very effective. It's about a 16-foot spear. Most of the soldiers here at Bannockburn had them. I'm dressed.
And this is what a lot of the Scottish soldiers would have looked like, is it?
A
What
lot
you've
of the
got
sort
on
of
here?
middle rank of Scottish
All
soldiers. Your lower ranks wouldn't have had boots. This tells you I'm sort of middle rank.
Okay.
I've got a pair of leather boots. Many of the soldiers here would have fought in bare feet. You've got your woolen trousers here, would have been homemade. You've got your leather hauberk there.
Oh, that's leather under there,
It
is
is.
it? Oh, yeah.
It's leather, yeah.
Okay.
I've got my gloves. I've got my gambeson. Some gambesons have been discovered with metal plates in them, just little ones. I've got my arming cap, and then I've got my kettle helm. That's so called because actually you would use it to boil water at the end of the day or make your stew or whatever. At the end of the battle.
In your helmet?
Yeah, you just take it off. You set up a fire. You just turn it upside down, fill it with water, and just use it. It's well designed for protection. It's nice and wide. Anything coming at the side, chances are it's going to be deflected.
Okay.
The top, you've got your ridges.
Oh, yeah, there's a big
Which-
reinforcement across the
Yep.
top there, yeah.
Helps keep the strength.
Well, you look fantastic, Lars.
Thank you.
I mean, I feel a bit underdressed, to be honest.
Yeah, we've got something for you. First of all, you've got your helmet.
All right.
All right.
I'll get rid of the beanie then, will I?
Yeah, oh, aye. Aye. Now, just,
Go and whack it on.
just
pretty
make sure
good.
that it's, yeah, that's fine. And then you've got your tunic. And this
There
is
we
what
go.
your well-dressed ordinary man would.
Let's have a look at
What
this.
do we
What we got? I'm an ordinary man, am
Just
I?
an
You're
ordinary
middle
man,
rank,
yeah.
but I'm ordinary.
Yeah, but
Cheers,
on
Lars.
Bannockburn, no man was ordinary, so, you know.
All right.
And then, armament-wise, you may have a dagger like this, but you'd more than likely have an axe because you're just an ordinary agricultural labourer.
All right, stop labouring the point. All right, give me a sec. I'll put this on.
There must be a changing room around here somewhere.
It's not a perfect fit, but see what we can do. All right, Lars.
Ah, they're looking good.
Explain to me what a schiltron is. If I was
Schiltron?
looking at a schiltron, what would I be looking at?
Well, if you're looking at schiltron, you're looking at anything up to 200-300 guys with spears of this length. You'd have your first rank, you're down on your knee, right?
So firmly stuck in. That's
Firmly
going
in the
nowhere.
ground. So if a horse does get in,
Yeah.
which is unlikely, but if it does, it's the ground that takes the majority of the force.
Yes.
Yeah?
And then me
So
in my
you
second
then-
row here,
You
I'm over the top of you then.
you
am
would
I?
have it, so you would be over my shoulder.
Yep.
So you'd be at that, you're looking at roughly the head of the horse.
My word.
And the man behind you,
Yeah.
he would then come
Go on,
behind
you go.
and he's aiming at the rider of the horse.
And I'm in there still.
Yeah.
Wow. So primarily a tactic used against cavalry coming towards you,
Very-
charging towards,
Very much so.
but very much kind of aimed at the horse rather than the rider
Yes.
then.
Yeah, because if you take out the horse, the man on top, he's down on the deck. It'll take him a couple of seconds to get up. And in those couple of seconds, you'd have somebody like
Go
me.
on, I'll,
There you go. So you hold that.
I'm in my,
Yeah.
I've got my
So
my
you have somebody
spike
like
here,
me, either with the axe ready, straight into the man, or ready there, and as the man's down, he stabs down. He either aims for the groin, the throat, the eyes, through the helmet, or the back of the neck. And in the meantime, his men are coming. They're still charging, and they see this knight dispatched. Again, the horse is smelling blood. It's the noisy, it's sweat, there's screaming, and we're all standing there still ready. And the psychological effect for those knights must have been quite incredible.
Goodness
You know.
gracious me. Brutal, isn't it?
Absolutely brutal. There were no rules of war. Anything went. And what you've got to understand is both sides, they're facing each other. They know they're going to die. They're going to try and fight hard to survive, and they will do anything to do it. Forget your chivalry. This is life or death.
And I don't think you can make it any clearer than that, can you?
No.
It really does.
No.
I'm feeling a little bit queasy, I have to say.
The 3 divisions of schiltrons faced off against the English cavalry on the boggy ground of the Carse.
You've got these 3 enormous schiltron divisions of the Scots out across the battlefield. I mean, how big would that army be appearing to us?
Yeah, I mean, for Bruce's plan to work, those spearmen have to fill up the whole space between the 2 streams. Any gap could be exploited by the English to actually break out, and if they can get round behind those spearmen, then it's the Scots who will be on the run. It's the Scots who will start to panic and break apart. So the Scots advance in 3 schiltrons. The 3rd schiltron, the 3rd big formation, stays for, at the start at least, up on the ridge, but the vanguard have to fill up all of the available space, have to block the English in, trap them here down in the Carse, because that reduces the options of the English down to 2. They can either fight their way out through these schiltrons, or they can run for it back across those 2 streams.
So it was by design, was it really? By design from Robert the Bruce, that the battle was going to take place between these 2 streams of water?
Absolutely, yeah. So what the streams do is they narrow the available front for the English. The English can only get so many men between the Bannockburn behind us here, and the Pell stream to the north, which means that only that small number of Englishmen can ever engage with the Scots. So it doesn't matter that the Scots are outnumbered, maybe by as many as 2 to 1, because only as many Englishmen as can fit down that narrow space can ever get stuck into fighting.
Robert the Bruce was pretty much neutralising one of the huge advantages that the English had, this vast majority of numbers. But no longer is that an advantage, because it's all been narrowed.
Absolutely, yeah. Bruce is basically forcing the English to fight the battle that he wants, not the battle that they want.
Historian Fiona Watson has come back to tell me more about the day's first significant engagement.
So what do we think actually happened?
Right, well, first of all is a great cavalry charge led by the Earl of Gloucester, who had been put by the king in charge of the English vanguard. So Gloucester charges straight at the Scots and is killed. And that's part of Bruce's plan as well, because what Bruce has done the night before the battle, when he's just made the decision to fight, has stipulated, okay, if we're going to do this, there will be no booty taken and no prisoners taken until we have won. Absolute discipline. And so this is an earl. This is one of the most wealthy men in England. His ransom would be fortune times whatever. And he is killed. The English cavalry are hemmed in. They're hemmed in by the Bannockburn on that side and the Pell stream on this side. So, and also, you know, there's not a huge amount of room for them to build up that great
charge.
Yes, yeah. And there's a lot of casualties in the first phase. The Earl of Gloucester dies, and so do a number of prominent English noblemen. It's a suicide run, it really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also you've got then people pushing and people not being able to see what's going on, people behind the English lines. So well, I can imagine that it really did degenerate fairly soon, and the English realised that they couldn't overwhelm the schiltrons, and they didn't seem to have any other plan.
And so the confidence perhaps of the English starts to drop. Meanwhile, the confidence of the Scots is on the rise.
The English have no plan B. They have nothing else to throw at the Scots but a cavalry charge.
Robert the Bruce's men could sense victory. The schiltron divisions now turned from defensive to offensive.
Once you've really dented the cavalry, you can either stand static and just wait for another wave, or you can march forward. The horses don't like impaling themselves on spears. You're marching forward, the horses are more likely to panic. They're more likely to rear, throw their riders.
So rather than schiltrons being used purely as a defensive technique, he's using them on the offensive against the English to disrupt their attack even more.
And for many of the English that were fighting at Bannockburn, they'd heard about the schiltrons, but a lot of them hadn't encountered them, and they hadn't encountered the effectiveness of these things. What you've got is a poorly armed band of men going up against the might of Christendom. and showing them. You might have armor, you might be on a horse, but you will still be defeated.
The Scottish schiltrons were now advancing, and the retreating English were forced to change tactics.
Now, of course, the cavalry needs to get back to let the infantry, and particularly the archers, the groups who might be able to do some damage to these Scottish spearmen, through. But because of the narrowness of the space, there's no room for the cavalry to get apart, to let the infantry and the archers through. The Scots, meanwhile, constantly moving forward, giving the English less and less space.
So what happens then? Surely it's kind of panic.
Yeah, the whole of the English army starts to break apart. There's no division anymore between the cavalry and the infantry and the archers and so forth. They just become one confused mass.
As morning turned to noon, 3 divisions of schiltrons slowly pushed the English back across the boggy ground of the Carse, towards the Bannockburn stream.
Things have not gone well for the English on the battlefield, and they've had to turn and retreat away from the Scots.
Yes, absolutely. Some of them, probably those on the northern side of the battlefield, maybe even those around the king himself, retreat north towards the castle. Most of the English have to retreat back south across the Bannockburn, basically back the way they came.
Why does the Bannockburn play such a large role at the end of the battle?
Well, naturally enough, the land on either side of the burn can be quite wet, the water from the burn seeping into the land around here. The landscape here has had 20,000 Englishmen and their horses and their carts dragged across it on the first day of battle, as those men and, of course, their horses try and flee from the battlefield on the second day. Anyone who slips or falls in the mud and in the water, the people behind them aren't likely to let them get back up again. They'll just trample over their backs. And we have this horrendous image from Barber's Bruce, written in the 1370s, of so many Englishmen dead and drowned down here in the mud and the water of the Bannockburn that you could apparently walk from one side of the burn to the other side of the burn without getting your feet wet. There are some estimates that run to about 1/3 of the English army dead and drowned down here.
Well, it's not even that big a river here, is it? I mean, we're not talking about the Ganges here or the Nile or something.
Correct. It's not, in the grand scheme of things, the most impassable obstacle, the Bannockburn, but it's just these circumstances that probably even the Scots haven't quite anticipated. It's not necessarily part of Bruce's plan from the start to be drowning hundreds or thousands of Englishmen here in the Bannockburn.
Thousands of English infantry, 100 knights and 1 earl lay dead on the battlefield. As the remains of the English army fled from the charging Scots, the battle was over.
So what became of King Edward II, the English leader? Well, he fled the battlefield on horseback and made it here to Stirling Castle. But when he arrived, the castle keeper, Philip Mowbray, raised the drawbridge, locking the king out, reasoning that the castle would imminently fall into the hands of the Scots. And whether out of spite or out of loyalty, by preventing the king from entering the castle, Mowbray saved his life.
Edward had no option but to ride east to Dunbar, an awaiting English ship, before heading back home in a humiliating defeat. The castle fell to Robert the Bruce, who'd won a key victory over the English, despite being outnumbered 2-1.
From what I've understood, the Battle of Bannockburn had already been won by the Scots by the time the English were fleeing and trying to retreat back across the Bannockburn itself here. But to learn about the hideous deaths that became possibly thousands of those English soldiers trying to escape, puts a real chill down me. And it's actually quite uncomfortable to be thinking about that stood where I am here right now.
For the Scottish, it was a landmark moment and the first of many battles over the next 14 years that would ultimately lead to their independence.